Continuing on, um, is it possible that Kirk Knox, perhaps, to quote Eric Fromm, there are different types of love, conditional and unconditional. Unconditional love is supposed to be more of an emotion that a mother has for their children, no matter what. There always will be there. This is embodied in God, of course, this unconditional love. But then there's the conditional love, too. Is it possible that Kurt, in a slightly more emotionally detached way, thought, my God, is it conceivable that Amanda could have been involved in this? Did his anger stem somehow from the fact that he felt really let down and disappointed that his daughter, after making such an effort to get over there, when he found out the type of lifestyle she was living? Now, I'm not here saying that she, was living in complete debauchery. That's not what I'm saying. But, the drugs and certain aspects of her personal life that came out, and Raffaele and the fact that he, boasted on my face of being high 80% of the time, is it possible that, that did give rise to some anger with Kurt, thinking, what on earth was my daughter thinking, as Raffaele's father must have thought. What on earth was Raffaele thinking, living the type of lifestyle, the drugs, his encounter with Amanda. So to come back to now the Italian perspective, for those of you who don't know Italy, well, the composer Giuseppe Verdi wrote, "You can have the entire universe, leave me just Italy." For you Americans, and I speak to you directly, and I speak to you as a fellow citizen, Italy is a wonderful, wonderful country, as I'm sure you know. The Renaissance, the arts, the architecture, the food, the sense of aesthetics, the fact that when you walk in Italy, you walk through centuries of ruin and you feel palpable the past, the Roman Empire, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Machiavelli, Dante. Italian culture has given a tremendous heritage to the world. There's no question about it. And for those of you out there who find yourself trapped in this mind frame of, that Donald Trump expressed, just being anti-Italian and thinking it's a backward country and its legal system is nowhere as good as ours, and our girl was framed, please just remind yourself that in every country there are good things and there are bad things. And the Italian justice system is not as archaic and partial as a lot of people want to put across. After all, as I've expressed in other forums, in America, Amanda and Raffaele, and Rude for that matter, might be on death row right now. They might not have had, their appeal might have been rejected. Or they might have been put in prison for life. Think about it. Rudy Gudet, as extraordinary as it seems, there's talk that next year he's going to be eligible to go out of his prison cell to study during the day. I mean, it seems quite extraordinary. But what I'm getting at is the system here gives people a chance to appeal at three different levels after the first trial. So if the first trial did contain a prosecution's thesis, which I personally consider quite doubtful, in terms of the ritualistic or maybe even satanic sex, which he kind of dropped because it just seemed beyond the pale, and he transposed the thesis from the monster Florence that he was working on before unsuccessfully, and he had a bee in his bonnet about this. And, if the first trial, if the police work here was sloppy, which there's no question about it, if mistakes were made during the trial, if information was leaked to the press, which shouldn't have been, if a lot of things happened that, in my opinion, probably didn't give Amanda and Raffaele a fair trial the first time round, but they had the appeal and they were liberated. And I think that that has to speak to the integrity of the Italian judicial system. It's like when John de Manuke was extradited from the United States. For those who don't know, he was alleged to be Ivan the Terrible, a horrific guard in a concentration camp, I believe Treblinka, and he was condemned to death, I think, in Israel. But then the Supreme Court liberated him because they had a reasonable doubt about his identity. And so that showed that Israel was capable of seeing both sides of the story. Now, it does seem strange that people would be found guilty, then found innocent, then found guilty again, and that they're going to interject another appeal. But I think the point I'm trying to make, as you understand, I'm sure, is that the Italian justice gives the chance to the defendants to be fully heard and heard at different levels. And the final sentencing, you will have to admit, if nothing else, fellow Americans, is really quite lenient. Because for Rudy Gudet to get 30 years for an atrocious murder, because let's just talk about him now, and to get it halved on appeal down to 16, that can only be described as a very lenient sentence by American standards, to put it mildly. And I think you will agree with that. So in summing up, what I'd like to say is I can understand that things have become very polarized. I can understand that people see things through the lens, the vector, the matrix of their own nationality, their own cultural conditioning, their own legal system. I can understand that a lot of Americans want to believe that Amanda's innocent. Like I can understand that a lot of English people believe that she was probably involved. Just as Italians also feel, most of them, not all of course, that Amanda probably was involved. And each person comes with their own lens, their own baggage also, and it conditions. So what I'd like to do in closing here is appeal to the Americans who may be listening to this to try to keep your minds open and to not consider that your baggage or your perception or your matrix of analysis is necessarily superior to other countries. And I'm saying that to you again as an American who lives abroad and who's lived in several different cultures. I think it's a grave mistake to start comparing. Pat Buchanan, remember, came up with this idea of legislation to declare that American culture was superior. I think that that very suggestion, in fact, is an admission of great weakness, because I don't think that one country or one judicial system or one way of thinking or way of analyzing things is superior to another. And I'll finish with an analogy. Michelangelo is not necessarily greater than an American artist. Aretha Franklin, many people think, was the greatest singer who ever lived. Some others will point to Pavarotti. There's a multitude of expressions of human experience, and I think we see these being played out in the context of this trial. And I encourage you again, have a little bit of restraint, just as I say very plainly in front of you, I don't know what happens. I've read as much, I've studied as much as I possibly can on this case, but I don't know what happened, and I find myself from day to day going back and forth, thinking, my God, the DNA, the blood drops, is it possible that this? It's a very confusing, very baffling case, and I think that above and beyond the beautiful woman, the sexual dimension, the drugs, the haunting beauty of the Italian city, and all of these elements that came into it, I think that the conundrum really resides in the fact that the case is so complex and no one piece of evidence seems absolutely determining. On Rudy Gudet, there's no question. He admits to being there. They have his DNA, they have blood, they have his handprint, they have his shoe print. But when Raffaele and Amanda, I think if one is honest, there's no definitive proof in either direction or other. In French, they talk about a faisceau d'indices, which is like a concording a series of clues that come together and that form a certain picture. In Italian, they use different language. Circumstantial evidence will gather together. Some people talk about a smoking gun. I think this case is very subtle. I think it has defied hundreds and thousands of people that have been thinking about it in a lot of detail. And I don't think anybody deep down really knows what happens on that fateful night on November the 7th in 2007, except tragically for Meredith and most probably Rudy Gudet and possibly Amanda Raffaele. but who really knows at the end of the day? Thanks for listening.